New York Times congressional correspondent Jonathan Weissman and congressional reporter for Roll Call Meredith Shiner. Welcome to you both.
Thanks for having us.
So Jonathan, in your latest article, you write this last-minute deal to avoid the sequester, extremely unlikely, but there could be changes in who decides where the cuts are made. Who makes that decision?
Well, right now, almost nobody makes the decisions because the rules that were laid out in 2011 in the Budget Control Act says that the cuts have to go across the board to affected programs and projects. It's not, you can't say, I'm going to spare an aircraft carrier, but I'm going to hit a golf course. Everything, every project, every program has to absorb the cut unless they were personally exempted. For instance, like personnel in the military or Social Security. Those are safe. Everything that's not impacted, everything's going to feel it. Now, there are members of Congress, a lot of Republicans, who want to at least give the administration more latitude to decide, you know, some programs don't work well, let's whack those and let the programs that are most vital stay, like air traffic controllers. That would really put Democrats in a bind because the White House does not want that kind of latitude. They want to keep the pressure on.
That is interesting. Meredith, I want you to take a listen to Budget Committee member Congressman John Yarmouth, with whom I spoke earlier this weekend. Here that is.
The real deadline is March 27th because we run out of money funding authority anyway. We're going to have to come to some kind of agreement on how to fund the government between the end of the month and the end of the fiscal year at September 30th. So Friday's kind of an artificial deadline.
Artificial deadline, the one we keep all talking about, Meredith, you know, 4 days from now, and it's really March 27th. Can you explain that, and is that why there doesn't seem to be a sense of urgency here?
Well, sure. I think that when you look at what the Budget Control Act did, it had originally implemented the sequestration to begin at the beginning of the new year. But with the fiscal cliff deal, in addition to $650 billion of new revenue, Congress basically, in their typical fashion, kicked the can down the road 2 months. So they created this March 1st deadline. But again, you want them to have some sort of other pressure to force them to act. So the wide conventional wisdom has been that this March 27th deadline, with the continuing resolution, which is that stopgap measure that keeps the government funded, can put some extra pressure on lawmakers to come to the table. But I think the one thing to remember is this March 1st deadline is real, and that real cuts are going to happen. And you see the administration employing top cabinet members like Secretary LaHood, who made a surprise appearance at the press briefing on Friday and then again made the rounds in the morning talk shows this morning, talking about the real impact of these cuts. So the administration and Senate Democrats especially are hoping that in these 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks, between this March 1st deadline and the March 27th deadline, the real cuts and the real impacts will mean something to the American people, and that there will be more pressure for Republicans to come to the table and for lawmakers to negotiate a deal.
You know, Jonathan, meaning something to the American people, how about meaning something to our elected representatives? Because the people being cut here include congressional staff members, but it's not going to affect the paychecks of congressmen and women. So staff members face furloughs, not lawmakers. You think there might be a greater sense of urgency if the lawmakers were going to get hit in their own pocketbooks?
Yeah, it is interesting. They exempted themselves, and they the White House is also exempted. You're not going to see furloughs in the Oval Office either. So, you know, they did go easy on themselves. You know, basically, they're going to act if they start hearing their constituents screaming. And both sides want to believe that, you know, want to believe what they want to believe. A lot of Republicans just don't believe that they're going to really start seeing the real pain until after that March deadline. April is when you're going to start seeing the furloughs. You're not going to see many furloughs at all in March. And so that March 27th deadline I don't think is that big a deal, because I actually think that the Republicans really don't want to shut down the government. That is very visible. I think the House is going to move very quickly in the next week or two to make sure that the government doesn't shut down. It'll actually be up to the Senate Democrats to decide whether they want to play with the Republicans and just keep the government going, or if they want to play hardball and perhaps let the government shut down.
Well, you know, you talk about the Senate. Meredith's latest article, I want to ask you about it because you write about the Senate Dems and Republicans working towards some sort of a compromise agreement. What does that include, and do you think there'd be a vote on it this week before Friday?
Well, So the Senate is planning to hold test votes on two separate things. Senate Democrats have a plan that would replace this first year of the sequestration with a balance of revenues and further cuts. They'd like to eliminate the direct payment program that was part of the agriculture bill that was passed on by partisan lines last year, but never fully got implemented into law. They have a series of other tax provisions like corporate jet taxes, but Republicans have said, we already gave you $650 billion in revenue when they raised the top income levels during the fiscal cliff negotiation. So you'll see Senate Democrats push that as part of their balanced approach, and then you have a lot of Republicans in what Jonathan talked about earlier, pushing these flexibility measures. Senator Toomey had a provision like this, Senator Inhofe has a provision like this, that would grant the administration more leeway to apportion the cuts and hit the same top lines as the sequester mandated. So Republicans see two sides of this. They would like the onus to be on the White House to make these cuts that might hurt and impact people, but at the same time there is some reservation that ceding this authority to the administration might mean cuts in programs that Republicans hold most dear.
Yeah, but when you talk about cuts that hurt most to people, Jonathan, there was a stunning, disturbing figure I came across while reading your latest piece. Roughly 600,000 low-income women and children would stop receiving food aid. Explain that. Does that really mean what it says?
It does. I mean, there's a program called WIC, Women's Infants in Children. It was not protected in 2011. So, yes, there will be a number of families simply dropped out. Head Start, too. I mean, I've talked to Head Start teachers who say, you know, we're going to have to actually pick and choose families to say, you can't come in next week because there isn't enough money for you. So there are, I mean, these are very consequential cuts. Because remember, because so much of the government was exempted, Social Security, Medicaid, food stamps, because Army military personnel was exempted, everything that wasn't exempted gets hit extra hard. The programs that are not protected in the military will take a 13% cut over the next 7 months. The domestic programs unprotected will take an 11% cut over the next 7 months. You cannot tell me that it will not be felt. It will be felt. And if you want to look at the macro numbers, yes, the government continues to grow. That's because Medicare takes only a 2% cut. That's because Social Security gets no cut. But the programs that will be affected will be affected. Don't let anyone fool you on that.
I really appreciate both of you bringing such clarity to all this. It was a great conversation. Jonathan Weissman, Meredith Shiner, many thanks.